It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 A.J. Muste Memorial Lecture. My name is Roger Bauman. I teach sociology at Hope College. I'm also the director of the interdisciplinary Peace and Justice minor, a partner in tonight's event. This lecture series was founded in 1985 by members of the Hope community led by the late Professor Don Cronkite to celebrate the life and accomplishments of the pacifist labor leader and 1905 Hope College graduate Abraham Johannes Muste. 1985 marked the 100th anniversary of Muste's birth. Professor Cronkite hoped, as he put it, that this lecture series named after Muste might help shape the life of the Hope College community. But it was not, Professor Cronkite continued, meant primarily to be a lecture about Muste, but a regular opportunity for this community to learn indirectly about Muste and perhaps about ourselves, he said. Its themes have evolved over time, aiming to explore issues that would have been of interest to Muste, including topics related to labor, civil rights, and the path of peace, always seeking to inspire current generations to strive for peaceful solutions to the world's conflicts. We're thrilled that Reverend Jim Wallace is here with us tonight to continue that legacy. In a moment, I'm going to ask Avery Rant, a minor in the Peace and Justice program, to come introduce Reverend Wallace. But first, in the next just couple of minutes, I want to do a few things very briefly. First, I want to acknowledge the support of so many people and parts of Hope College that have gone into making this event possible. The committees and the students of the Peace and Justice minor, the A.J. Muste Lecture Series, and the Provost's office for their generous contributions. Thank you. Second, I want to note a few ways that you can follow and get involved in the work of peace and justice at Hope, whether you're a student, staff member, faculty, or a member of our wider Holland community or West Michigan, or even further than that. For students, the interdisciplinary Peace and Justice minor is an opportunity to pair the study of peace and justice at Hope with any major or career path that you might be interested in, because conflict and injustice exist everywhere. So the work of peace building and justice needs to happen everywhere. Interested students might consider taking IDS 296, Introduction to Peace and Justice Studies, with me next spring. Or reach out to me and I'd be happy to otherwise talk to you about the minor. For others, please consider signing up for our regular emails that we send out to keep our community up to date on the work of the program, events like this one and other opportunities on campus and off campus for engagement with peace and justice issues. We would love to stay in touch with you. And if you believe in the work of peace and justice and want to do more to support our students pursuing that work, perhaps you might consider making a donation to our program. As you've seen on the slides above me, we are making brand new t-shirts and stickers available for our donors. This lecture series and our curriculum and co-curricular activities would not be possible without the generous support of our donors. There's more information on the table in the corner over there, and after the event, some of our Peace and Justice students are going to be available to meet you and talk with you and tell you more about the program. So lastly, turning back to the theme of tonight's talk, the last thing I want to say is that Reverend Wallace is joining us at a fitting time for us as a community, as we are in a season of discernment about what it could mean, as President Scogin has put it, to be a college that follows Jesus. At times, we might feel like that should be a self-evident question. There's only one gospel. As the Apostle Paul reminds the Galatian church in the opening of his letter to them, he writes, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ, and are turning to a different gospel, which is no gospel at all." So we have this evidence that from the earliest efforts of people trying to figure out what it would look like or should look like to follow Jesus, that what that means is deeply contested at every turn. As a sociologist of American Christianity, I recognize this and teach my students that there isn't one American Christianity, empirically speaking. There are many American Christianities. To get at this, I often ask, what does the Christianity of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference have to do with the Christianity of the white Southern segregationists? King helps us get at this question in his famous letter from Birmingham jail. We know this document as an iconic touch point of civil rights activism, but we don't always recognize it as a very religious document. A letter written to fellow clergymen, they were all men in this case, all white, who wrote an open letter to King on Good Friday, 1963, chastising King for bringing the tactics of nonviolent civil disobedience to Birmingham while appealing at the same time to law and order and for that to prevail. In response, King explains why he is in Birmingham in his letter. He says, "I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their 'Thus saith the Lord' far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid." From the era of the apostles to the historic civil rights struggle to our own time, we face this difficult task of discerning what the gospel is and the more difficult task of understanding what it means and requires of us collectively. And then maybe the hardest task of all, deciding whether we are up for that challenge. So, I'm not here to preach. I won't take much more time away from the Reverend Jim Wallace, who came a long way to unpack this for us. But I'll borrow from Reverend Wallis and others who have walked this path, and I'll leave you with the suggestion that if the gospel that we affirm and aspire to live out doesn't sound like actual good news to the people who are hurting the most, the suffering, the people who are on the edges of our society and not at home or welcome in its centers of power, then maybe we're talking about something else and trying to make the label gospel stick for other reasons. If the gospel of Jesus isn't good news about freedom for those experiencing literal unfreedom, the bondage of slavery, the terrorism of Jim Crow, the loneliness of being ignored and unseen, or all other kinds of exploitation that make people unfree, then is it really the gospel of Jesus? So I'm so glad we have Reverend Wallis to challenge us on that question tonight. So I'll ask Avery to come up and introduce Reverend Wallis. As she does, I'll just note our plan for the rest of the evening. Reverend Wallis will share with us. We'll open things up for questions as much as we have time available. And then after that, Reverend Wallis is going to stay and sign books. If you've brought books with you, or they're also available for sale at the bookstore table out in the hallway. Once the formal event is done, if you would like to get your book signed, you can hang back, and we'll try to do that in an orderly way. Avery.
Thank you, Professor Bauman. Hello and welcome everyone in attendance tonight. I am overjoyed to see so many of you taking time out of their evening to listen to what myself and AJ Muste would consider a very important topic in our current climate. My name is Avery Rant, as Professor Bauman said, and I am a current sophomore here at Hope College, and I'm majoring in sociology and social work and minoring in peace and justice. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing the amazing person and speaker that you will be hearing from. Jim Wallace is a writer, teacher, preacher, and justice advocate who believes the gospel of Jesus must be transformed from its cultural and political captivities and always be good news to the poor and oppressed. He is a New York Times bestselling author, public theologian, renowned preacher, and commentator on ethics and public life. He is the inaugural holder of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Chair in Faith and Justice at the McCourt School of Public Policy and the founding director of the Georgetown University Center on Faith and Justice. In 2022, Washington Magazine named Wallis one of the 500 most influential people shaping policy in D.C. Raised in a Midwestern evangelical family, as a teenager, Reverend Wallis questioned the racial segregation in his church and community, which led him to the black churches and neighborhoods of inner-city Detroit. He spent his student years involved in civil rights and anti-war movements at Michigan State University. He is the founder of Sojourners and is the author of 13 books, including his latest book and New York Times bestseller, The False White Gospel, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy, which was released in April. Wallis also hosts the popular podcast, The Soul of a Nation. He served on President Obama's White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships and has taught faith and public life courses at Harvard and Georgetown University. He also serves as a research fellow at the Georgetown University Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Wallis has previously taught at Harvard's There it is, Kennedy School of Government, and was awarded an honorary doctorate in humane letters from Georgetown University in 2007 when he gave the college commencement address. Coach Jim also served for 22 seasons as a Little League coach for his 2 baseball-playing sons. You always have to throw something fun in. And now I ask all of you to help me begin tonight's lecture by giving a warm welcome to Reverend Jim Wallace.
Is that better? Let me thank Avery for that introduction and mentioning Little League Baseball. And I said, Roger, you had already preached well, so this is an altar call. So I see friends out here. I have siblings here tonight, very special for me. A.J. Muste. I've known and loved his life and work for a long time. His books are on my shelves. But A.J. Muste, who some call the American Gandhi, is an alum of Hope College. You can clap for that one. That would surprise many people, I think. And I wonder, looking forward to this, I wondered what A.J. Muste would say about, I hear there's an election in 2 weeks. Is that right? Yes. I think he would have some things to say. I wonder what he would say. I'm going to try and lift up some texts from the Bible that I think he would lift up at a time like this for us to think about them carefully. It's a very tough time. I just looked through my emails before I walked in, and there's another attack, another personal attack, which is not new. And I was thinking, I bet you A.J. Muste would be getting a lot of attacks right now. Because what time is it? Biblically, what time is it? The Bible has 2 kinds of time. Chronos time, tick-tock, incremental, and Kairos time. Kairos time is a time that can change time, even for decades or generations. Most elections are Chronos time. People get all involved, they're important always, but now this one, I believe, is a Kairos time that really spans parties. I always say, don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. It's time these days to go deeper, and A.J. Muste always did. So how do we have a lecture like this, which I'm so grateful that you all have this lecture. It's just really wonderful that this is now a lecture that can draw so many people here to this conversation, because I want to have a conversation. I'll say some things and have some Q&A, but conversations in the next 2 weeks are going to impact the outcome of this election. Who we talk to, who we don't, what we say, what we don't. This, many of you probably agree, this election is a test of democracy, right? See nodding heads. It's also, though, a test of faith. Test of the integrity of faith. It's also a test for a new generation. I go back and teach tomorrow at Georgetown, and I had a great time today with a number of students here at Hope. And it's great to have a great crowd like this is wonderful, but to have that small conversation we had today, a couple times, was really good. Peace and Justice minor at an evangelical college. Wow. Let's make it a major. So here we are, and I want us to, again, not a lecture about AJ so much, but what he might be saying and doing. So he went here to college. Then he went to what's now New Brunswick Seminary, Reformed Seminary in New Jersey. And if you hope you all take a look at him now after this lecture, he moved away from his Reformed church theology. After he left all that, it just wasn't dealing with the world he was living in, which he thought he had to do. So he moved away from all of that, lost his faith, and Muste left the U.S. as a Marxist-Leninist and returned as a Christian pacifist. That's very interesting. And he didn't believe that passive should define the word pacifist. He was active in his faith, active in his nonviolence. Dr. King once said that A.J. Muste had influenced the civil rights movement about nonviolence as much as anybody else. That's quite a thing. And he was in Paris. He was broken in body and spirit. And while on vacation for a time he needed, he entered into a church in Paris. Just walked into church. And he said, in that church, he was saved, he said, by a mystical experience that reignited his faith that he left behind and committed himself to nonviolence. Now, I can relate to that. I grew up in Detroit, as was said. I have siblings here tonight, grew up with me in that evangelical tradition. We were Plymouth Brethren. Oh my goodness. All around the room. And the most recognizable thing in my city, my church, my nation, the most recognizable thing was mostly unrecognizable to all the white Christians I grew up with. They didn't recognize it. And I was sharing with the students today, one of my mentors just died a week ago at 95. Bill Pennell, who is a black evangelical, very different than white evangelicals. And my questions that they wouldn't answer in my white world and church and school, those questions drove me to black churches and people like Bill Pennell. He was the first trustee of the board of Fuller Seminary, first black faculty there, dean of the chapel for 10 years. And there's a whole new documentary just released 3 weeks before he died called The Gospel According to Bill Pennell. Check it out. I did an RNS Religious News Service column about that just this week. It was a whole different gospel, as you heard from Roger. And seeing the church from his perspective turned my world around too. But I remember an elder in my church took me aside one day because he was worried he's heard I was going into the city, working with black men, going to black churches. He was worried what was going on with me, and he wanted to make clear something. Son, he said, now, Christianity has nothing to do with racism. That's political, and our faith is personal. You've heard that before. That was political, and our faith is personal. I didn't have words to go with that till much later. But these are the words that came to me after I came back to Christ. God is personal. If God isn't personal, what's the point? God wants to be in relationship with all of us in this room, even knowing everything about us. God is personal, but never private. Never private. And the privatizing of faith is the great heresy of the evangelicalism I grew up with. Muste wanted to take his faith public. He was a labor organizer. He was an anti-war organizer. He organized against racism. And like him, I was moving toward, we were at Michigan State, we were shutting down the university. We were, Marxists one night, anarchists the next night. I was reading Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, Karl Marx. I knew them all, But after we shut down Michigan State, you remember old people here, shootings at Kent State, bombing of Cambodia, shut down the schools. So I helped shut down Michigan State. But after we did that, and they let us graduate anyway, I never had quite gotten shed of Jesus, even though my church, we left each other behind. And I got to this text that became my conversion text, 25th chapter of Matthew. I call it the "it was me" text. Jesus said, I was hungry. It was me. I was that mom that had 2, 3 jobs, and I still needed SNAP, food stamps, and they cut it. Jesus says, that was me. I was thirsty. I was that mom, in Flint who couldn't get clean water for her kids that wasn't full of lead poisoning. The white moms in the Flint suburbs were doing fine, but not her. Jesus says, that was me. I was naked. I was a stranger. I was that family in Guatemala that couldn't grow food on my land anymore because of climate change. And then these armies came and wanted my son to be a boy soldier. If I wouldn't let them, they threatened to gang rape my daughter. So we packed up everything we had that we could carry, like getting naked. And we became strangers. Walked thousands of miles to an America where we were told we'd have asylum. And they put us in cages. And our kids in different cages. Jesus says, yep, that was me too. I was sick. They didn't expand Medicaid in my state because of politics, and I was sick. Couldn't get health care. Jesus, me too. I was in prison. Like 1 out of 3 black men in America, I had a relationship with the criminal justice system. I was disproportionately policed and imprisoned. Yep, me too, says Jesus. And I'm going to focus on the word stranger. I was a stranger, he says, and you welcomed me, or you didn't welcome me. The word stranger in Matthew 25 literally means immigrant, refugee. That's what the word means. It's not related to that. That's what it is. So this morning on the news, that's mostly what I heard about. Immigrants. My goodness, they're all from prisons in the Congo and insane asylums. And they're rapists and killers and they're bringing diseases. Some say they're bringing leprosy. Interesting. There hasn't been leprosy anywhere in the world for a long time, but evangelical Christians know that word. It's in the Bible. Leprosy, these immigrants bringing leprosy. Oh my goodness. So the stranger, and we'll get to Springfield in a minute. I just came from Ohio. The stranger is being demeaned and demonized and threatened. Now they say they're going to deport millions of strangers, breaking up families. And Jesus says, how you treat them is how you treat me. So let's go deeper than those Why are they talking about immigrants all the time? And what they mean and say are non-white immigrants all the time. So this is all in our text, all in our scriptures. It's there in what we say we believe. I think A.J. Muste might have known about Matthew 25. So here's your title, my goodness. Why Christian Nationalism versus the Gospel of Jesus? Oh, boy. Let's be clear here, right? White Christian nationalism versus the Gospel of Jesus. Now, the name white Christian nationalism spells the problem. First of all, you take the most welcoming, inviting, inclusive vision in the history of the planet, the gospel of Jesus, and you make it white. Really? Now, this isn't new. White Christian nationalism goes way back in our history before our founding, where there were papal bulls and Puritan preachers who said, yeah, this new land, it belongs to white Europeans. They said that theologically. And even if you have to displace or destroy most of the indigenous population, that is okay. It's God's work. Then they enslaved a whole African population, and they justified that. This goes way back. Donald Trump didn't invent this. It goes way back to our founding, to what I call America's original sin. It goes way back, and now they're turning it into a comeback. Why? Here's why. Because we are closer in this nation, right now, closer than we've ever been to a multiracial democracy. We've ever been. Yeah, that deserves a clap. So that's the good news. And if we achieve that, we'll be the first nation in the world to do so. So a lot of white people are scared. They're angry. And the white Christian nationalists today, I hear them, they say, we're going to lose our nation, their nation. And they're fighting back, and they say they'll win by any means necessary, including violence. So they're prompting fear that leads to hate, that leads to violence. More Americans now say violence might be necessary, right? So this is white. And Christian, white Christian. But they don't mean sacrifice and service. They mean control. They use the word dominion. And some of you are theologians and pastors and know what I mean when I say it's an appeal to an old thing called dominionist theology. It goes way back. Who should have dominion over all the others? It goes way back. And then white Christian nationalism. Nationalism. Now, Unlike Avery, the person that introduced me at another event recently, she was very, very nervous, and she said, and Jim Wallace founded Sojourners in 1871. So the whole night was about how old I was. And tonight, I'm the oldest I've ever been. But I wasn't there for the ascension of Christ. I wasn't there. But I have read about it. And here's what he said to his followers: go into all the world, making disciples in every nation, and teach them to observe whatever I have commanded you. Whatever I have commanded you. Now, I love this. I've been all over this country a lot in the last 3 months, actually. And I love this country. So many things I could tell you I love about this country. But nationalism puts the nation first above other nations to win against other people. It's about putting our nation first. To worship a nation is, biblically, the word is idolatry. That's what it is, and we have to talk like that. This isn't just politics. And getting friends and family who are thinking about voting in a different way that you might be thinking about voting, I'll tell you, the answer isn't just getting them to listen to Rachel Maddow. It's not going to work. How do you get them to the text? We're going to go through those texts tonight. So the text that I'm going to read tonight, that I think Muste would have probably known quite well, is this one. An expert in the law stood up to put Jesus to the test. Teacher, what must I do to inherit everlasting life? Jesus answered, what is written in the law? You know it. What does it say? He knew it. And he said, yeah, well, you must love the Most High God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and strength, and neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. Now, you can tell by that tone of voice, what I've learned is this. In the text, I've studied the text deeply, and I've learned it was a Washington lawyer. Because I know that tone of voice. So then he takes it further. Okay, love God, love your neighbor. Okay, gotcha. Who is my neighbor? That question the lawyer asked Jesus is the most important question in these next 2 weeks. Who is my neighbor? So Jesus gives him an answer with an example, his best example of a neighbor, of a good neighbor. And he picks a Samaritan. Oh my goodness, now in his Judean society, his audience, they didn't believe there were any good Samaritans. That word isn't in the text. Samaritans were mixed race, half-breeds, dangerous, false worshipers. You'll get in trouble. If you stay away from them, they're going to harm you, they're going to hurt you. In fact, there was rumors that Samaritans had formed cartels in Mexico, bringing guns and disease and, I'm mixing up the story. But Samaritans were othered in the same way we see people othered right now. They were the others. And the Jewish scholars tell us the man beaten by the side of the road was a Jew. And he had two of his religious leaders pass him by, ignored him. Why? We don't know. I said to a Presbyterian church yesterday morning, I said, maybe they had a session meeting to go to. Who knows? But it was the Samaritan who stopped, and he had compassion on the one laying by the side of the road. Now, some of you, like I, have lived on Jericho roads before. They're dangerous places. And when you see something like that happen, maybe it's going to happen to you too if you stop. In fact, this guy might be part of a plan to get you trapped, right? And so to stop to help means risk. It means trouble. It means changing your schedule. It means using your resources. It means taking time. So he puts this man on a donkey and takes him to an inn. It's 2 denarii, which is 2 weeks' wages in that time. He says, the innkeeper, and if this is not enough, I'll come back. He changes his schedule, right? Changes his schedule to help the man in need. Now, Dot King has this wonderful sermon on the Jericho Road. You should listen to it. The Jericho Road. But he reverses the question, King does, from if I stop to help the man, what will happen to me, to this one. If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him? He reverses the question. So he stopped to help the other. I love the Peruvian theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, one of the authors of liberation theology, who says this about the neighbor. The neighbor is not he whom I find in my path, listen carefully, but rather he in whose path I place myself. We are structured out of relationship to each other. It's not accidental. My siblings will know when my dad got back from World War II, a naval officer in the Pacific, he and GIs like him got an FHA loan for their first house. They all got GI bills to get free education. Housing, education make you middle class. My government made my family middle class. But no sailors, black sailors on his ship, got an FHA loan or a GI Bill. No black GIs did. So that's why my neighborhood was all white. My school all white. My church all white. It's not accidental. It's structured racial geography. Being a Little League baseball coach, I've seen moms bond with each other over their kids. But when moms aren't bonding across racial lines, it changes things. So the Samaritan is showing us a different way forward, showing us that maybe the neighbors that we need to love don't live in our neighborhood. They're outside our neighborhood, right? This isn't just be kind and be generous and volunteer in a food bank once a week. It means who's not in your neighborhood and who's the neighbor you need to love. John Meacham, great historian at Vanderbilt. John is freaking out as a historian. You see him on TV all the time. He says, this is the question. Are we neighbors or are we enemies? Neighbors who can disagree with each other, that's good, that's democracy. Different opinions, different policies, that's good. But we're turning our neighbors into enemies. Everything is us and them. I saw it on commercials this morning. There's them and there's us. It's funny, they said, there's those transgendered prisoners getting government money for gender care. That's them, but this is us. It's all us and them. That's our politics now. And A.J. Muste had a different kind of politics because he had a different kind of faith. So back to Springfield. So we're watching, I was in Ohio just now, and there's this guy that lives there called, what's it? J.D. Vance, that's it. And he started this thing about Haitian refugees stealing and eating our beloved dogs and cats. And he said later, well, I did kind of make it up. I was trying to make a point, meaning I lied about it, but trying to make a point. Then in the presidential debate, the guy he works with, what's his name? Donald Trump, I think is, said, yeah, they're eating dogs and cats. And this morning he said, don't forget the geese, right? So these were lies. Newspaper stories, media stories don't stay in the press for more than 2 or 3 days, right? This one has lasted. They've doubled down. They keep lying. Strong men know if they keep lying over and over, it works. People believe the lies. So I've just counted up the lies and the lies are always about non-white immigrants. And they say they love more immigrants from Norway. Now, I ran into a Norwegian other day, said, none of us want to come here. So they're lying about Springfield. And this is impacting now the whole state. They've got death threats, bomb threats, shutting schools, hospitals. So the Ohio State Council of Churches just called to say they're having an emergency meeting in Ohio of churches the last weekend before the election to deal with what Springfield has wrought. So I'm going back to Columbus in about 2 weeks for that. Churches are being impacted. Which gets us to another text. Jesus says, you'll know the truth and the truth will make you free. Again, a deeper dive. I'm trying to refresh and reframe these old texts we know so well. A deeper dive says to me, the opposite of the truth isn't just more lies, it's captivity. Truth and freedom are indivisible. And a whole lot of people are now captive to lies. And some of them are good people. You know them, your family and friends. I'll hear lots of stories afterwards. Yeah, there's my brother, or my mom and dad, or some of them are good people, but they're captive and stuck to lies. Pilate and Jesus are arguing, debating on the day of his crucifixion. And Pilate is losing the debate. And that's when he says, oh, what is the truth anyway? Yeah. Washes his hands and kills Jesus. What is the truth anyway? Strong men want to undermine the very idea of the truth. There is no truth. There's alternative facts. And we're living, literally, my friends, in parallel universes of facts. Michigan's my home state. We've got parallel universes in the state of the facts, of what's true and what's not. So strong men want you to just hear from them so you'll just believe them. So the truth becomes very important at a time like this. So in Michigan, where I've been to Michigan 5 times in the last 6 months. And there's lots of noise, political noise. You're surrounded by it all the time, right? Political noise. I saw it this morning, just in my hotel room. Political noise all around. Part of my work, part of my job is to listen to the noise and try to provide perspective. But sometimes I get so weary of the noise. I see nodding heads. Do you get weary of all the noise? So when I feel that weariness with all the noise, I go right to the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:26. With all the noise in my head, I read, then God said. Oh, be quiet, noise. Then God said. Then what God says is, let us create humankind. That's all of us. Let us create humankind after our own image and after our own likeness. Here, first chapter of the Bible is the divine foundation for all our talk about human rights, civil rights, voting rights. So when I get on a training tomorrow night for training poll chaplains in Michigan to go to precincts where there's most threat of voter suppression or voter intimidation, I'll be asked to do the moral framing of the training, which is training in de-escalation, nonviolence, bringing a calm presence by the callers who will be alongside the lawyers in polling places. Clergy, and even those who aren't ordained, lay people, where anybody who wants to be part of this now can be part of it. You can too in Michigan. We need lots of people more in Michigan because this state's going to be critical to the election. And my moral framing is that text, Genesis 1:26. Which means, if you think about it, it means that any attempt to suppress a vote or not count a vote or corrupt a vote is nothing less than a literal assault on Imago Dei, the image of God. This isn't just politics. This is theological. So we're called Faiths United to Save Democracy. And now all the ministers and rabbis who've joined and imams who've joined, they all say, we're part of the Imago Dei movement. Indeed, we are part of the Imago Dei movement. So I'd like to just close before our Q&A with, because of where I am, Hope College. I was in the hotel and I went into the gift shop. I was looking for a hat that just said Hope. But they all said Hope College, you know, so. And I'm from Georgetown, so, you know. I may get one anyway. So a lot of you in this conversation, thinking about these texts and feeling what you're up against, we're up against, right here in Michigan. Pennsylvania, I was in Wisconsin last week, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And the question I get all the time is, where's the hope? I don't feel any hope. Anybody feel that these days? Not very optimistic, not sure what's going to happen. Polling looks really tight. Ads are worse and worse. Where's the hope? Well, I'm very blessed to have my new chair at Georgetown, named after my mentor, teacher, tutor, and friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So I want to tell you what Desmond Tutu taught me about the difference between hope and optimism. Optimism is a feeling or a mood or even a personality type. You know, cup half empty, cup half full. Tutu says, no, that's not hope. Hope isn't a feeling or a mood. Hope is a choice, a decision you make because of this thing we call faith. Hebrews says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, right? The evidence of things not seen. My best paraphrase of that is hope means believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. That's what faith means. That's what hope means. So, the first time I went to South Africa, I've been back many times since, but first time to build relations between American churches and South African churches at the invitation of Bishop Tutu. But I'd snuck in the country, because only way I could get in with all the security. He said, meet me at the cathedral. So I got in and I got to St. George's Cathedral, beautiful cathedral. And I got there, and it was surrounded by hundreds of military police. Automatic weapons, helmets, shields, all that. Hundreds of them surrounding a cathedral. And I didn't know what that meant. And I snuck inside to sit with friends, and a rally had been called and canceled by the apartheid regime. So Desmond Tutu says, okay, we're just going to have church. Try and cancel that. So he starts to preach. And I got there just as he began. A man in long flowing robes, looking like Yoda, you know. And just as he began preaching, the front doors to his cathedral are broken open. Broken open. And in come the South African security police. Can you hear me over here? And these guys are thugs. I mean, they are. I met some of them after that. They're thugs. And they line the walls. Imagine this is St. George's. They line the walls of his cathedral with tape recorders and notepads in their hands, as if to say, you just got out of prison. Go ahead, say it, we'll write it down. You'll be right back in there. Go ahead, be prophetic, be bold. So Desmond Tutu just stood behind that pulpit and he stopped talking. And he bowed his head, as if in prayer. And we're all feeling surrounded, inside, outside, and terrified. What's he going to say? He's quiet for a while. Then he looks up and he smiles that signature Desmond Tutu smile. Then he points at them. You are very powerful. You are very powerful, but you are not gods. And I serve a God who will not be mocked. And then he said to them, remember, we're surrounded. He said, so, since you've already lost, we invite you today to come bouncing like a good black preacher, you know. We invite today to come and join the winning side. Young people leapt out of their seats and went dancing outside to confront the soldiers, and we just followed them out, right? And these soldiers didn't know what to do with these dancing worshipers who weren't afraid. 10 years later, I'm at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. Guess who's master of ceremonies? Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I said, Bishop, do you remember that day in St. George's? Do you remember what you said and what we did? He smiled. I said, today, Bishop, they've all joined the winning side. There wasn't one South African on that day of Mandela's inauguration who hadn't always been against apartheid. He smiled. And then, though, sitting there with 150,000 people, South Africans from all over the world, tears running down our faces, because we just heard this prisoner announce the birth of a new nation. But I stood there realizing that that's not where people of faith are most needed. At the party, at the celebration, at the victory. It's wonderful to be there and feel it. Wonderful, but we're needed back here at St. George's, where you can only see the party through the eyes of faith. You can only see the celebration through the eyes of faith. And you believe it's coming. You don't know how or when or what will happen to you and whether you'll get there. But you see the party through the eyes of faith when no one else can see it. That's what we do as people of faith. I think A.J. Muste understood that. We are the ones who have to see what we believe through the eyes of faith, and then we go into what I call our trajectory, and I'll close with this. Their trajectory right now is fear to hate to violence. It's all over the place. Ours is this: faith, that prompts hope, that creates action. The answer to cynicism is action that makes change. Think about it. Faith, hope, action, and change. Hope College. Faith, hope, action, and change. Even when the polls don't look so good, or Pennsylvania's down, or those new ads are terrible, right? My sister Barb here knows childhood development well, and we were talking over dinner last night. A very veteran organizer just talked to me and said, fear shuts down the brain. And a doctor in Ohio yesterday, I'd said that, he came up and said, you're right, I'm a doctor. When we do MRIs with patients, they get scared of the MRI inside that thing and what's going to happen, and we see the brain waves change. They go from the cerebral, rational, and they go to, Barb said, the stem, the back, where it's just protect yourself. You become irrational. Fear governs. They're running on fear. And so, for us, the answer isn't to succumb to fear. What does the Bible say? What casts out fear? Perfect love casts out fear. That's a faith decision that we make. So, faith, hope, action, change. So when you're surrounded, as I guarantee you will be in Michigan over these next 2 weeks, you're going to be surrounded by noise and scary things, ugly things, fearful things. I just want you to know, here at Hope College, that Desmond Tutu wants to whisper in your ear in these 2 weeks. Listening now, Desmond would quietly say, you're on the winning side! Can I get an amen? Yeah. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Wallis. Thank you very much. We have time for questions. I'd like to make the first questions available to students who are with us, and then we'll open it up beyond there. I will come around with the microphone. Please wait till you have the microphone so everyone can hear your question. It's important. And we'll go from there. Is there a student who has a question? I'm going all the way to the back.
Thank you, Reverend Wallace. My name is Meg. I'm a junior at Hope and a very recently declared peace and justice minor. And I have a question about the conversations you mentioned early in your talk. You were mentioning how important the conversations we're going to have in the next couple weeks are.
Yeah, right.
And in my world, we're raised with these values of how to have good conversations. We're very much taught how to be kind and listen to people, but then we're also repeatedly told, this isn't the class for talking about politics. Oh, we don't talk about politics at work. Oh, I don't like to talk politics with my friends. So my question for you is, where are we supposed to be having these conversations? How do we start them without getting punched?
Brittany Packnett is a great Black Lives Matter movement leader. I met her in the streets of Ferguson many years ago. And she came and spoke to my students last spring in my class. And they were raising this, what do I do, what do I do? And very diverse group of students, but the white students say, what do I do, what do I do? And she said, well, if you want to join Black Lives Matter demonstrations and face rubber bullets and tear gas and maybe not knowing if you'll survive till the next morning, you're welcome to come. And if you survive, you can say, hey, I was there and I made it. But the riskier thing for you white people to do is talk to your family and friends. That's the riskier thing. And in the next 2 weeks, we can't say, oh, we don't talk about politics. I heard today students don't want to, because they won't get in an argument, right? But my students, guaranteed, because of what they're hearing in my class on faith, race, and politics, they'll want a discussion before Thanksgiving. What to say when I get home to Uncle Fred or Dad. And I'll say, well, don't say you're wrong, but thanks for paying for my college. But find some common ground here. If they're people of faith, let's talk about. I give you a bunch of texts tonight. There are more texts in this book and many more in the Bible. Bring it back to the text. Here's what, I'm thinking about the Good Samaritan, or when Jesus says, welcome the stranger. What do you think about that? Where's our common ground? And I tell my students, instead of telling them they're wrong, just say, they love you and they want to always know what's going on in your life. Tell them. Tell them how you're changing, how your perspective is different now. Go to those texts. And I like, to your question, I like Micah. What does the law require? Do justice. What's next? Love kindness. Walk humbly. Now, I got to say, I'm glad justice comes first there. I really am. That's my best word, too. But then it says, speak kindly, then walk humbly. Not all social justice people I know speak kindly or walk humbly. As I said before, I'm older than I've ever been tonight, and I don't know all the answers. I've become a better listener, I hope. But we got to have the conversations. The demonstrations aren't going to change things for 2 weeks and afterwards, but conversations can. And Brittany's right. A black woman leader says to white people, the risky thing, the courageous thing, is to talk to your family and friends. Now, I know where I'm speaking, what part of the country I'm speaking to. We had a great event in Grand Rapids last April, and lots of people came, probably mostly leaning in our direction, but they all know people who aren't. You're in Ottawa County, right? I know about Ottawa County. And some of you are from Michigan, Ohio, you're from all over the place. So how do we have these conversations being faithful to who we are? In Ohio, when I went to North Carolina, Arizona, Wisconsin, I said, you're in play. And they all said, yeah, we're in play. Down in Ohio, I said, you're not in play. It's a big Senate election, but you're not in play. I was in Oklahoma City, and I said, they invited me here, and they said, to the university, they said you were a battleground state, and you're not. I said, but to all of them I say, how do you put faith in play? How do we put faith in play in all of our communities? How do we put the integrity of faith in play? Because that's going to last longer than just an election. How do we put faith in play in our conversations? And every person in this audience, every one of you, is an influencer. There are people and places where you have influence. Be influencers where you have influence. These next few weeks, and we're going to have a battle after that, no matter who is recorded as winning an election. And so how do we put the integrity of faith in play? That's what I want to ask us. Another student?
Is there another student question?
Thank you very much for your lecture. I'm Stephen. I'm a junior here at Hope. So, hi.
There you are.
So I'm wondering, I really appreciated, you mentioned kind of eliminating the us versus them that's existed so often racially. But, you know, looking at our society today, there's a really significant us versus them that exists politically. And there's so many...
It's the nature of our politics.
It's the nature of our politics, I agree.
Yeah.
And so how can we work towards fulfilling our convictions, but trying to work and move past this us versus them that's so prevalent?
Mm-hmm. Let me give you another text that I didn't raise tonight. Galatians 3:28. You all know it. There is no longer a Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. We are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, right there in that text, you have the principal pillars of race, class, and gender, of oppression and division. Those three are involved in every situation of oppression: race, class, and gender. And they're saying, these apostles, what I didn't know is they made this text a Galatian ritual, reading, rite. They read that text at every baptism of new believers. That text. They were kind of saying, well, so part of our mission is to break down these divisions and barriers, overcome them. That's what, we're not perfect, we don't always do the right thing, but we're trying, our Lord calls us, not in a social action committee, but part of our vocation and calling is to break down these divisions. That's what we do, that's who we are. If you don't want to join a group like that, you better go somewhere else, because we're not the right group for you. And then I talked to an archivist today at one of our student meetings. We talked about Fisk University has this archive, this collection of white slaveholder Bibles. Guess what text has been removed from every one of them? Galatians 3:28. So how do we do that in a climate where we're just polarized all over the place? I'll tell you one text that A.J. Muste knew. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peace lovers." Isn't that what he said? No, it wasn't that. Wasn't that? No, I was, blessed are the peacekeepers. Wasn't it keep the lid on? Yeah. No, blessed are the peacekeepers, for they shall be called children of God. That's a pretty big deal. And you're a Quaker. And FCNL in Washington, Friends Committee on National Legislation, has a big sign up on there. It says, "Love your neighbor, no exceptions." No exceptions. So how do we, who want to do this, how do we not just keep pointing the finger and blaming and feeling like we're better than all those people, but how do we begin to have a listening no matter what way the election goes? How do we have a conversation to try and bring us, friends of mine who were former members of Congress and the Senate, they used to hang out all the time. A Little League coach would meet Republican and Democratic office holders who had their kids on our Little League teams. That doesn't happen anymore. So how does a new generation, how do you all try to make this happen? Because we're not just trying to save democracy. That's not enough. We have to transform democracy. Young people I know and met again today are not happy with the way things are in the political parties, in democracy. Particularly young people of color are not happy. Young people generally are not happy. So they don't want us to save democracy for them. They want us to transform democracy. And we better do that after the election. Does that help? Thanks. Other student?
Let's take another student question, and then we'll open it up to all lifelong learners.
Yes. Yeah, my name is Galfiro Enriquez. Thank you for your time, for being here. I'm over here in the back.
There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. So how do we as a community, as Christians, as Americans come together towards this election when we're all sitting here together right now, but we each have had different experiences that have shaped us to who we are today. And a lot of times in society, when I look around to my peers, even in class, we all have different experiences to who we are and how we grew up and how society has made us who we are. So how can we come together when in reality, a lot of people feel like they're living on a different planet or even a different country? I'm just interested in that.
We often have our sociology controlling our theology, and not the other way around. There's a wonderful biblical arc about racism in the Bible. In one of my last books, America's Original Sin, starts with that Genesis text. Then it ends in Revelation 7, where all these people are gathered to worship God. And it says they're worshiping in all their languages, in all their tribes. They are not some homogenous group, like they're all trying to be Western white Europeans. No, they're all the tribes, all the languages, and that's the arc. That's where we're going, and we have to be those who are willing to get outside our sociology to get to our theology. That's what I had to do in Detroit. You know, I had to, work alongside black men, and one of them brought me home for dinner to meet his mom. His father had passed, and we got talking, as we always did, and his mom said, well, we're talking about the police in Detroit, because that just sparked the whole riot, insurrection in '67. She said, well, that's why I tell my kids that if you're ever lost, can't find your way home, and you see a policeman, duck under a stairwell, hide behind a building, wait till he passes, and then find your way home on your own. When she said that, when Butch's mother said that, my mom's words screamed in my head to her kids, her 5 kids, you ever lost, can't find your way home, look for a policeman. Policeman's your friend. He'll take you by the hand and bring you home. That was, to use our language, an epiphany. I had one epiphany after another. I've always learned the most in this. My worldview has changed the most when I go to places I was never supposed to be, or meet people I was never supposed to know or talk to or become friends with. What I call it in my class is a theology of proximity. We need a theology of proximity. So we come from different sociological, and I've said that's structured. That didn't just happen. Our pathways get structured. The question is, how do we get proximity to people from different sociologies that can change our theology? Theology of proximity.
Another question.
Right here.
There's one over here too.
The biblical passages you cited deal with personal responsibility and personal behavior. However, it doesn't necessarily translate to national behavior. We individually obviously don't kill, but sometimes as a nation we do. And it's seen to be maybe right to do some things. So all these other things about the neighbor and how we accept neighbors and bring in other people and so on, is it the case that those biblical passages that are told to the individual, do they automatically go to national policy or not necessarily? How would you make the case for that?
First, I'd say they're not individual. Matthew 25 talks about going to the nations. The Great Commission, going to the nations. So we privatize that and individualize that. The God of the Bible just isn't a God of charity. The God of the Bible is a God of justice. Time and time again, a God of justice. So these texts are not just, to me, if the gospel doesn't change our lives, what's the point? But it changes our lives so we can change the world. When I'm with a black church, a lot, they don't say, this is just for us personally. Dr. King never said that. I find the gospel of personal salvation so deeply embedded in the black churches, as is the gospel of social justice, deeply embedded in black churches. We got a white problem here. That we privatize the gospel. So let's look at what the scriptures say. And when people say, that's not for, a society, that's just for me individually, that's not what the Bible says. So I'll have a debate about the Bible with any white evangelical who wants to say, this isn't for us. It is for us. And Dr. King talked about the beloved community. That's what he wanted to live and work for. My Jesuit friends at Georgetown call it the common good. The common good, not just the individual good, but the common good. So we need to rethink our biblical faith and put it in the context of nations and societies where I feel like I was converted by Jesus Christ to the kingdom of God, who then tells me to live that kingdom in the world. The Lord's Prayer. On earth as it is in heaven. Not just in heaven, on earth, right now. And so I want to bring us back to a full Bible reading, and not that is often politicized as a distraction to keep us from seeing. I'm going to say flat out, any policy that demeans, demonizes, and destroys immigrants as a policy, with Matthew 25, those policies are antithetical to Jesus Christ. I'll go further. Those policies toward immigrants, the system is broken. Do I know that? It's going to be complicated to have a comprehensive, legal, just, compassionate, humane system. It's broken, and Democrats are as responsible for that as Republicans. Both sides have broken this. But now we have these people coming, and they're being made the issue in this election. That's wrong. That's wrong. And to say they're our enemy who are invading us, well, let me tell you a great story. So my ED at the center, Jim Simpson, Scottish. His parents are too. They're Scottish. And they came to America for him to be a Presbyterian minister in Georgia, rural Georgia. That's a culture shock. So Mom is singing in the choir, and every Sunday they have a choir practice before the service, and the choir director says a prayer at the end for the service. So she begins to pray, and she's not a militant political person, but she's scared. You can tell she's scared. Lord, protect us from those cartels who are coming with disease and killers and criminals and rapists, and help the soldiers to get them before they get us. And the wife of the pastor says, no, stop. That's not true, and we don't lie in church. I can tell you're afraid, and we can discuss this issue and talk about it, but that's not true. I want you to know it isn't true, and we don't lie in church, do we? Now, if it was me standing up at that moment, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective as the pastor's wife standing up. So there are differences in policy that are legitimate, important, helpful to a democracy. But there are some things, Jim Crow was Antichrist. The immigration policy that treats them as invaders who are here to harm us, That's Antichrist. So how do we, and there are, I have a lot of Republican friends, I'll just say, who feel homeless, who don't feel they know where to go. And one of the things that they bring up all the time is the immigrant policy, which they think is contrary to their faith. The Republican Christians who feel that policy is contrary to their faith. So there's some things that we need to stand up for clearly and speak our faith into as more than policy differences, but principles that define us as people of God. I got preaching there alone, I'm sorry about that, but I'm cool with some more. I'm happy to, no one's leaving, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Was there a question down here?
There was one over here, too.
On a little bit different topic, how do you feel about us being the supplier of all the wars, bombs, and bullets around the world, and just being the supplier of the destruction of so many people?
I'm against it. And so would A.J. Muste have been against it. And so we're in a situation where we have people doing things that we don't believe they should be doing. And so how do we create a framework where that can be questioned and that can be changed? And I'm from Detroit, and I've talked to a lot of pro-Palestinian people in Detroit who are feeling this personally. And I know a lot of rabbis who are feeling it personally. It's personal when your family's being killed. So how do we have a different conversation than our binary foreign policy and go deeper? How do we, if the Middle East blows up because of the wars keep escalating, we're all going to be in great trouble. So how could this election calm things down, not heat things up, calm things down and take us to a different place, a better place, where voices like Muste's can be heard? There are ways to resolve these things and not just keep exploding these things. So thanks for raising that. Yes, so a bunch of hands over here.
I'm coming over there.
Where's Oprah? Where is he? Here he is.
Thank you. I'm a Hope student here, and I'd like to thank you for allowing us to actually have a conversation, drawing off of what the first student said.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you to explain, how is it loving and peaceful to let the illegal undocumented immigrants that are seeking asylum here in without vetting, since it is resulting in more murder and rape to our children and theirs? And we know that there are 300,000 undocumented children right now that are lost at the border and that are being human trafficked, and they're the immigrants' children too. So I'd like to understand how that is peaceful and justful. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's not, and it's terribly exaggerated. That's a talking point from the other side. I know it, I've studied it. That's not happening in the way they say it is. However, immigrants should be vetted, carefully vetted. And we need an immigration system that does all that, So how we treat the children is the right question, but when political sides exaggerate the problem to make us afraid, that doesn't help us. So how do we get down to what's happening and not let either party use this politically, which all parties try and do? How do we get to the facts, what's really happening? And I'm happy to chat afterwards if you want to talk about those talking points. But how do we get to the place where deporting millions of people who have been here since they were children, and they came illegally with their parents as infants, and now there are young people probably at Hope College, Dreamers, DACA, they're in universities, they're in the military, they're all over the place, and they are going to be penalized, and they've never done anything like that. There's a whole lot of people who are here who are part of us, and need not be attacked. Where in Aurora, Pennsylvania, the language is Venezuelan gangs have taken over Aurora. And the Republican mayor says, not true, not true. There's some gangs that took a housing complex and we've dealt with them. So let's talk about what's happening and what's not happening. People are not invading Aurora and taking it over. That's a lie, and they're saying it as if it's true. That's not true. The mayor of Aurora, Republican, says it's not true. So let's get to the facts, what they really are, but then keep beneath the facts, how do we treat the stranger? Jesus says, you welcome them. And you fix a broken immigration policy, which needs to be fixed. I totally agree with that.
We'll take one more question over here, and then we'll have time for one more. I'll try to come to the other side of the room.
Yes, Jim, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to discuss a situation I had last week, and hopefully you can give some ideas on it. I was in a meeting discussing things irrelevant to what we're talking about, and a pastor, retired, age 82, of a well-known local denomination here, right in the middle of the meeting said, now, with the election coming up, if you don't vote pro-life, you're voting incompetency and dunceness, and the world, you're not a Christian if you don't vote pro-life. How do you handle that when a bully comes at you like that? And it's more the question, how do you handle the bully?
Well, I would probably ask them if they're pro-life.
We are.
Well, they think they are. Are they pro-supporting women in difficult, tragic situations with nutrition and health care?
No, they want just the abortion.
That's not pro-life. That's pro-birth, not pro-life. So my view is consistent pro-life. Wherever life is threatened, nuclear weapons. Muste had nuclear weapons, poverty, racism. We need to change our conversation in this country about abortion. It's being controlled by extremes on both sides, in my view. How do we have a better conversation? And Tara, what does it mean to support women and low-income people in difficult situations? Things that would reduce abortion dramatically in this country, I'm for. And I want to see both sides, who have different views on a lot of these things, commit to how do we dramatically reduce abortion in this country. That's where I think most people are. So birth control, well, I have no trouble with that at all, birth control. Some do. That's a fair question to ask. But I think we need better conversations in politics about many of these things. What should we do with a question like abortion? Or what do we do with I'll just say this, LGBTQ are all initials that stand for people who are beloved of God. Okay? Now, but what do you do with policies? Let's talk that through. Christians should be willing to have a better conversation about politics in the political world and not just be chaplains for one side or the other. How do we get to a better conversation? I never knew AJ. I wasn't here in 1901 when he was here. But I bet you he had rigorous conversations with a lot of people on different sides of the political spectrum. I'm guessing, Roger, that's true. So how do we have that kind of conversation? But so that was our last question, yeah? I see more hands. It's up to you.
We can take one more.
One more. Over here. How about if there's hands up, just make it, here's the thing. Questions should be questions. So if it's a sermon, hold it. But let's take a few more just questions in a row, and then I'll try to respond to the end.
It's not a question, it's a comment. I don't know if I can articulate this correctly,
Go ahead.
And I don't expect a response, but someone might say, that Christianity itself has a strong element that defeats the goal of justice for all people, because it's us versus them. It's the saved versus the damned. And so Pentecostal Christians, coming out of this kind of biblical imagery, which is very clear, for example, in the book of Revelation, that Trump is the divinely appointed to save the church.
In Revelation it says that? I must have missed that chapter. The point is, there are many who feel like the answer to bad religion is no religion. I have close friends. There are days when I feel that, when we get so crazy on the religious side. But I believe, and I used to think that I was against all this stuff. I believe the answer to bad religion is good faith, is true faith, better faith. So that's a conversation I want to have. I have spent a good part of my life fighting religious fundamentalists, but I also know secular fundamentalists who are against religion per se. Because of all our mistakes and flaws and failings, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher, and there wouldn't have been a civil rights movement without a black church. It wouldn't have happened, right? So it's a battle going on between what kind of faith. And so this is where politics isn't just on the ballot. White Christian nationalism is on the ballot. What kind of religion we're going to have going forward. So what I wrote about is a false white gospel that I don't want to see succeed. And I'll be very blunt here. Every movement has to figure out who they can persuade. If I didn't think people were persuadable, I wouldn't be doing all this and wouldn't have written this book. Who they can persuade, but also who they have to defeat. Non-violently, but at ballot boxes. There are power brokers who are using and abusing religion for political power. Fundamentalism always does that. Islamic, Jewish, Christian, they all use religion to gain power. And that's the kind of religion that I want to defeat at the ballot box. Okay? So a parting scripture that I need to read almost every day. John talks about the truth a lot, and he also talks about light. Darkness has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. That's a text that I feel a lot of days. But also, John says, the light has come into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I believe that and hope you do too. Thank you very much.